Hi everybody, and welcome to the second of these GIS modules. It's hosted here through the Center for Digital Scholarship at the University of Notre Dame. In this module, we're going to be focusing on raster data. So just like they're all going to start here, I'm just showing you where the file should have been saved. These are the things that you should be looking at and that we're going to be dealing with for the demonstration here today. So if you look in this Demo2 folder here, you have basically two files, each one of which is a raster data layer. These are two different satellite images, one from 1973 and one from 1987, that we're going to be manipulating and working with in this particular demonstration. So if you haven't already, go ahead and start up ArcGIS or ArcMap through the Start menu. And go ahead and, if you're still seeing this menu, just choose Blank Map and hit OK. So in the last module, in the very first one, I just went over a few of the navigation things and saving files and stuff like that. So please refer to that if you need to. But just as a little bit of a reminder, when we add data, we're going to use this particular tool to bring in our new data layers. And if yours hasn't already shown up someplace like this in one of the demo folders, you're going to choose this connect to folder to map the location, to map essentially a bookmark to the folder that you're storing all of your data in. So you would just go in and choose wherever your GIS folder is, choose the root folder and hit OK. And then go into Demo2 data, and either by holding select or dragging around both of them, we're going to add in both of these layers here. So go ahead and hit OK or add. And what you see is we have two different layers, one of which, like we learned about in the demonstration or in the lecture, is grayscale. So it's a panchromatic image, it's black and white. And the other is color. And you can see that the color in particular is significantly lower resolution. We see spatial resolution. We see a lot less data in there. And that's even more true if we begin to zoom in on it. So if we zoom in on Notre Dame campus here, we can see decent detail in our panchromatic higher resolution one here, and much, much lower resolution. We can see the individual pixels in the panchromatic, in the multispectral Landsat image there. Now, that's not always the case. I don't want you guys to come away from this thinking that multispectral imagery is always lower resolution than panchromatic imagery. Although it often is, it doesn't necessarily have to be. So we're going to start off just by dealing primarily with the grayscale image because it's easier to run any of those filters, to do any of those sorts of analysis on a single band image than it would be to do it on a multi-band image. And then we'll do a little bit of the multi-band stuff at the end. So just go ahead and turn off that Landsat image for now. And the very first thing we want to do is begin to manipulate how we're going to view this particular image. And we get to a lot of this stuff in what's called the layer properties. So for this particular spot image, we can either right-click on it over here in the table of contents or just double-click on it very quickly. And if you right-click on it, you're going to go down to the properties here. And what we'll end up with is a whole series of tabs that are essentially information about that particular layer. So general would let us add things like change the layer name, how it's displayed over here, if we wanted to give a description or any credits, if we wanted to control how it's shown, if it's only shown if we're zoomed in a certain level or zoomed out a certain level. The source is going to give you all sorts of information about it, the number of columns and rows, how many bands, the spatial resolution, so essentially the cell size of each pixel, what type of pixel it is. This is a case it's an 8-bit. Some things about the location of the image itself, the coordinate system. These are all things we'll get to later on in the semester. We could also the particular metadata one here, we're not going to deal with this very much, but we could enter some additional stuff about what wavelengths are being sampled, stuff like that. The extent would allow us to sort of display when it's displayed and how much of the image is. So if we had an image of the entirety of North America, but we were only looking at northern Indiana, we might want to set the extent a little bit differently. Display will let us do a few things. We could set the contrast and brightness. We could make it transparent or not transparent. We could do some different choices of how it's displaying the image in general, whether it's displaying every individual pixel or whether it's kind of doing a very quick rendering of it. Let's just try to do a quick little change of the brightness and contrast right here. So if we were to crank the contrast up to 70 and the brightness to 30, if we hit apply, it's going to run it on the thing behind us. If we hit OK, it's going to close this window. But if we wanted to make it sort of stick around, we could hit OK. But let's just hit apply because we're not going to keep this. And you see that changes the image quite a bit. So let's just go ahead and put these back to 0. And hit apply again, and our image is back to where we're used to seeing it. Now the one we're going to work with the most for changing imagery and sort of how it's displayed is this symbology tab right here. So just go ahead and click on symbology. And this is pretty common. We're going to deal with this particular tab both with raster data in this week or this module, and then with vector data in the following modules. But basically what we were able to change here are just a few things. We can change the high and low numbers that are being displayed. Now, I want you to be aware that this is not going to change the actual high and low values. It's just going to change what's being displayed. We could change what type of stretch is being applied to it. Now, I think I said in the lecture that ArcGIS always brings in images with some sort of stretch on them. So you see right now we have a % stretch. What this is basically doing is it's just cutting off the highest and lowest 0.5% of the image. So let's try to turn this to none and hit apply. So this is what the image actually looks like. There's a lot of very, very dark stuff kind of in the middle and a few sort of really light white spots. Now, I would encourage you guys to go ahead and start playing around with looking at what different stretches do. Standard deviations is pretty standard. This is a pretty common way to view these images, as is the minimum maximum is another one. That's basically just stretching it between the lowest and the highest values. A few of the others are a little bit different. % clip is again that default we've had before. But really, the reason we're doing these changing the stretches here in the layer properties to begin with is this ability to actually get to the histogram itself, like what you see right here. So go ahead and click on that histogram button, and this is where we can begin to do some custom histograms. So this is our normal histogram. You can sort of see there's lots and lots of gray stuff. There's not a lot that's very, very bright. Most of the values are sort of less than 100. There are a few peaks in there. Now if we wanted to do a custom one here, we could begin to drag that histogram in. So what it's going to do is it's going to stretch what was previously this value here all the way out, and that becomes a 255. And if I do the same thing, drag it in a little bit here, what was previously, let's say like a 25 here, is now being displayed as a 0. So you can see the new histogram behind and the old histogram, the new histogram in purple and the old histogram in gray there. So if you hit OK and apply, you can see that it doesn't change things tremendously. That's kind of what a lot of the other histograms are doing. But I want you guys to get an idea of how you change these histograms and how you begin to display them in an interesting way. Once you've sort of played around and created one of your own, if you're in there and you're doing it, you might notice that you can pretty quickly do some other kind of weird things. You can move this down. Try to leave them at the top and bottom. You can put in additional ones that do sort of other things that may not make a tremendous amount of sense. They sort of go backwards in there. Those are really complicated ones that begin to look a little bit more funky. So if you get to one of those and it's just really, really not working for you at all, just go ahead and switch it back to none, hit apply, go back into the histograms. And you can always click on these things to sort of move them around and delete them as well. So just be careful with them. If you drag the little buttons there off the edge, then they disappear. So that's back to the original histogram. So once you're done, go ahead and leave it on standard deviations. Hit apply and OK. And I just want to show you the other way to begin to deal with the histograms, because this is where we're going to be working with a few of the other types of image analysis that we're going to work with. So we have an additional kind of pane that we can get to, and that's this. In Windows up here we have what's called the image analysis window. So go ahead and choose that. Yours probably wouldn't pop up exactly where mine did. It probably popped up something like this. All of the ArcGIS little windows like this can be docked. So if you sort of have it floating like this, you could run the mouse over to here. It's going to dock it over in that corner. This will kind of make it appear and disappear. You can really put them wherever you want. I'm particularly partial to having mine over here and a little bit smaller than they like to, but you're welcome to do whatever you want with it. And you see we have sort of three main parts in here. We have the layers that we're dealing with. It should look very, very similar to your table of contents. We have choices of how that layer is displayed, and then we have a bunch of different processing things we can run on it. So essentially what happens is once I choose a layer up here in the top part, I can begin to run any sort of processing or begin to change the display on it. So what you see here I can begin to play with the brightness and contrast just like I was before. It's just a little bit easier to get to now. If you ever want to bring it back to the default, you just choose these buttons. It brings it back there. I can begin to make it transparent. This would be particularly important if I had a layer underneath it. But I can also begin to play with the stretches here. I can't do the custom ones quite as well, but I can go through and actually just look to see what the difference between these different stretches might look like. So again, just play around with those a little bit, begin to display them however you might want to. Now the very bottom section here, like I said, is where we do the real big analysis stuff. We can do things like clip our image, so basically like you would in Photoshop, just cut it down, crop it. We can save individual copies. We can do a few other kind of things in here, and most of them will have a little pop-up that comes up if you sort of mouse over on them. And then you have the three other sections down here. This very, very first one here is going to let us apply any sort of shaded relief if we had an elevation data set, something we'll get to later on in the semester. The second one will allow us to do mosaicing. So if we have multiple parts of an image and we want to sort of fit them together, we can do that there. That's something we'll get to in a later module as well. And the third one here is where we run those convolution filters that we were talking about in the lecture for this week. So if you look in here, we have a series of drop downs. Some of these should look familiar. Sharpen and blur are essentially high pass and low pass filters. These various other ones we're going to pick out when there's a sharp difference. So there's horizontal line to text, vertical line to text, diagonals. We have ones that look for less sharp things that look for smooth sections. We have a couple of regular 3x3 kernel filters. We have a couple of 5x5 kernel filters in here as well. Now there are ways to get to custom ones and ways to do more additional ones, but we're not going to really deal with those in this particular demonstration. They're sort of hidden away in other parts of it. But let's go ahead and run a regular sharpening 3x3 filter on this particular spot image. So make sure your spot image is selected up here. Just choose sharpening 3x3, and then as soon as you click this filter button, it's going to run it. So it's now increased the spatial frequency. So it's basically found places where it's a little bit different and made it a lot different. And you can sort of see what that looks like in here. Now I encourage you guys to run several of these things, run as many as you want to. Play around with looking to see what they might look like and what they're different. At the moment, anything that you've run is temporary. So this filter underscore spot is a temporary file. It's not saved anywhere on your hard drive that you can get to easily. Once you've run a few of these things, you probably want to save it permanently. So to do that, you're going to click on it up in the table or the image analysis thing here, and then this little save button over here. This particular one does save an individual layer, so it's going to actually have you export it. Now this is a little pop-up that you're going to get familiar with as you work through some of these different demos that I have here. And it's kind of an annoying thing. This is another sort of legacy file format, old computer specific thing about ArcGIS. And essentially what it is, what we're looking at is it separates out the location of the file, so the folder that it's being stored in, from the name. So to save it is in a particular location, you're going to click on this little button over here. If it comes up in your demo2 folder, well, that seems like it'd be great. You could just hit add, but that doesn't work. You have to actually go find the folder itself, click on it once so it's highlighted, and then hit add. And then it's going to bring it up in there. Now I'm going to call this high pass spot 1987, so I'm just going to change that to high pass at the front there. Now that's just because you remember a sharpening filter is a high pass filter. Hit save. It's going to run happily in the background and make a copy of it. And what that is, it's going to ask me if I want to add it. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And now it's added it in as a permanent file. It's as a permanent file. This one is not. Now you see they look a little bit different. And that's because when I add something into ArcGIS, it puts a stretch on it. So it's already put a stretch on the image, and there wasn't one on it before. So that's why they just look a little bit different. Once you have that new permanent one in, you can always just remove the old one, that temporary one, if you right-click on it and just choose Remove. So go ahead and experiment with other filtering techniques, other stretches. What this is going to do is it's going to highlight particular types of land cover for you, and begin to sort of show some things that you might not be able to pick out with your naked eye. So once you're done, let's go ahead and work on the multispectral image a little bit. So we've been working just with this black and white panchromatic all visible light reflectivity spot image, but let's go ahead and switch over to looking at the Landsat one. You may want to zoom out a little bit if you haven't, just because it is such a dramatically lower spatial resolution. So if you've added it in and it asks you anything about building pyramids or calculating statistics, you do want to go ahead and say yes to all of those. And when we've added it in, what you very quickly see is that it has band 1 in the red gun, band 2 in the green gun, and band 3 in the blue gun. That's just the default way that it adds it in. Obviously, you probably immediately look at this and say, I'm fairly certain those aren't the colors of Notre Dame, Indiana. And in fact, that's true. That's because the wavelengths of light that are being displayed in those particular guns are not accurate to the true life colors that we would see with our eyes. So if we go into the actual layer, we might want to turn off the stretch just to see what it would look like without it. So go ahead and go in, and just, if you're in the symbology tab, just go in and turn off no stretch. So that's kind of what it generally looks like without. That's not particularly a great view, also because these bands are not red, green, and blue. So essentially what we have in a Landsat image like this, an older Landsat image, is we have 4 different bands, 2 of which, 3 and 4, are from the near infrared. 2 is green, and I'm sorry, 2 is red, and 1 is green. So if we want to make this look like something we're relatively used to seeing, at least from satellite imagery, we actually want it to be 3, 2, 1. So what this is showing us is near infrared, red, and then green in the different colors. So if you hit OK, you'll see it changes to be one of those kind of red images that we're used to seeing as satellite images. And let's go ahead and put a stretch back on here. I'm just going to do standard deviation. So what we begin to see is areas that are red are probably more heavily vegetated. Areas that are sort of gray like this are probably either fallow crop fields, or construction, like built-up areas. And in fact, this is South Bend, Indiana. This is part of Notre Dame campus. The really, really dark areas are water, because water absorbs almost all infrared light. So we can see pretty clearly what we're looking at here. If we want to play around a little bit with the bands as they're being displayed, we can go back in there. We can always turn them off so that we're just seeing an individual band. So if we just wanted to see what was happening in the blue gun there, we could do that. And we're seeing what it looks like sort of scaled from no color to blue. We could just leave one out. I find those not the easiest way to visualize data. And in fact, if I'm more interested in one particular layer, I think it's better to switch it over to stretched here. And what that does is it looks at one individual band at a time. So if I wanted to just look at band 3, sort of scaled from light to dark, I could do that. If I just wanted to look at band 4, I could do that in there too. Now, again, we want to leave it on RGB composite because that's really kind of the classic way that we look at color imagery like this. But if you needed to sort of investigate a particular band, you could do that in there. So the last thing that we want to do here is I want to just show you a little bit about how to work with multiple files simultaneously. So we have, this is pretty common, we have multiple layers in here. We have a dark, we have our panchromatic layer, we have our multispectral layer. And there's some tools in the image analysis for sort of displaying these things at the same time. Now I can kind of click them on and off in the table of contents or over in the image analysis window. That's all fine and good. But sometimes I want to see them in a little bit more detail than that. So there are two tools in here that you can use to do this. The first thing you want to make sure you have is the top layer selected. So whatever layer is on top, have it selected over here. And then this one right here is what's called the swipe tool. So if I click on that, you see that suddenly I have this sort of arrow that moves around depending on where I am. Now as soon as I click, I can kind of drag one layer back off of the other one like that. So you can sort of see a few, comparing the layers just sort of by dragging. And I can come from any one of the 4 main corners of it. Now the other tool I have is again with the top layer selected, I have this flicker tool. So if I click on that, it's just going to start flashing them. Now I can start setting this to go higher or slower. It's the number of, I think, milliseconds between flashes. You start getting really low and it's almost kind of nausea-inducing. But that's another good way to be able to kind of see multiple layers at the same time. All right, so that's pretty much it for what I wanted to go over today in this particular demo. Again, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or to talk to anyone on the sort of forums as they might exist for whatever incarnation you're taking these demos for. Additionally, there is an assignment associated with this particular demonstration, with this particular module. So go ahead and take a look at that and turn it in whatever way is expressed to you. Otherwise, have a fantastic day, and I hope that this was helpful.